underneath the seat in front of you, keeping all exits and aisles clear. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard. Once you have located your seat, we ask you that you please step out of the aisle so the passengers behind you can pass you. This will expedite our boarding process. Your large carry-on items need to go in the overhead compartments. Your smaller ones underneath the seat in front of you, keeping all exits and aisles clear. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard. Once you have located your seat, we ask you that you please step out of the aisle so the passengers behind you can pass you. This will expedite our boarding process. Your large carry-on items need to go in the overhead compartments. Your smaller ones underneath the seat in front of you, keeping all exits and aisles clear. Good evening, ladies.
Hey y'all, welcome back to the Austin Boarding Pass live stream. Today we got a pretty fun idea that I came up with. It's kind of been, we've looked at the data in all sorts of different ways over the past few days and a few weeks, I guess, looking at the top best flights to take, the top worst flights to take. Now we're going to look at the best and worst airlines. And if you've never flown on a particular, I guess everyone has different opinions about the best airlines, right? Like everyone's had a bad experience and a good experience on just about every airline. So using actual data, which I've been collecting since May 19th of this year, we're going to see what airlines perform the best at the airport, and then we're going to do a fun exercise and we're going to tier list them. I've never seen a tier list. It's kind of just like ranking in like different tiers, like what are the best airlines and what are the worst. So today, let me get the mic a little closer here, but today, let's just get into the data. Let's have a good time. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. So here we go. So I want to go through here all the top 10, the top airline tier list. And we're going to go into the stats first, and then we'll rank them. We'll use the stats to help us rank them. So the first thing I wanted to look at, and also I've also required here a minimum of 150 flights in that time. So that means essentially you've flown 2 flights per day since May 19th. There's a few big airlines that aren't, surprisingly, not on this list. Like Frontier has not flown 150 flights in that time. But all the big ones are here, basically. So if we look at our top list here, Southwest by far and away has the most flights, 15,000 flights since May 19th, and they've offered 103 different destinations in that time. So Southwest, American, Delta, United, those are the big sort of carriers in the U.S., and they obviously round out the top 4 at Austin. That's really no different here. Alaskan Airlines is also pretty interesting because they're next on that list, and then you sort of have the 2 low-cost carriers in Allegiant and Spirit, then JetBlue, which is mainly Northeast area, and then you have 3 foreign flagged airlines in Air Canada, Aeromexico, and British Airways. So if we look at just the destinations offered, I do think it's kind of interesting that Southwest obviously offers the most because they have the most flights, but then Delta only offers 14 different destinations, but is also up there in that upper echelons, number 3. So they're definitely having fewer destinations, maybe trying to focus more on reliability or just sort of getting you to their hubs rather than getting you to wherever you're going to go. We have Alaskan Air, which also sort of stands out to me as only 7 destinations from Austin. And then Allegiant and Spirit, 15 and 21 destinations. So those sort of low cost carriers are going to fly to more destinations, but they're going to fly there less frequently. Whereas Delta, the mainline carriers, they're going to fly there usually once per day or twice per day. They usually don't do these seasonal schedules as much, where they'll just fly out Thursday, fly back Sunday, or something like weird like that. And Southwest's scheduling is all over the place. They'll fly all sorts of different places every day of the week. It's pretty unique. And then, of course, you sort of have the foreign flight carriers like Aeromexico, Air Canada, and British Airways pretty much only fly to one destination. And in the case of Air Canada, they fly to two. And Aeromexico, I guess, once flew to another destination in Mexico. I'm not exactly sure what that flight was, but usually they just fly to Mexico City. And then I also wanted to take a screenshot from the flight stats dashboard here, and this is just showing all of the airlines and their stats for since May 19th. So you can see on the left we have the grade that I've given them, and that's based on their flight score. So flight scores a metric that I created where basically you get full credit, you get 100% if that flight was on time, so you get 1 point. Or if it's late, then you only get 80%. And then if it's very late or extremely late, then you only get 50 or 20%. And then if it's outright canceled, you get no credit for that flight. So we just count up the total number of points divided by the total number of flights. And then that's sort of your flight score. So a flight score of 100 would mean that every single flight was on time. And a flight score of 0 would be that every single flight was canceled. So as you can see here, we have that band. Like Aeromexico is the number 1 at 95%, and then British Airways is at the bottom at 81%. So we're not, the band isn't crazy there. We don't have like huge winners and losers there, which I thought was kind of surprising. But where you do see the big difference is that on-time percentage. You definitely see British Airways is the lowest at 46, and then the highest is Aeromexico at 85%. And then cancellations, fortunately, they're not super high, but United is very high. It's almost 5% canceled, and that's primarily due to the issues they had a couple weeks ago in the Newark area, and I guess primarily Newark, and it just sort of cascaded through their system. And Southwest had something similar to that that's not captured in this data because it was back in December, and I was involved in that, so that will definitely have an impact on my ratings for Southwest. But you can see the trends here, that there's definitely some winners and losers when it comes to how reliable these airlines are, and this is going to be one of the biggest parts that I'm going to flip back to and reference when I build my tier list here. So let's get into it. Let's build the tier list. I've only included down to D, so S through D. There's only 11 airlines that we're ranking here. I feel like having way more tiers would just be overkill. Also, if there was really an F tier airline, I just wouldn't recommend. I don't know if they would even be in business still, honestly. Maybe in some parts of the world, like where it's really, maybe Air Canada could be F tier. I hate Air Canada, but yeah, maybe that's some bias ranking theory here. But we'll start at the top and work our way down to the most flights to the least flights, I think was the way I was going to order this. And so S tier is, if you've never seen a tier list, S tier is the best tier, and then A is second best, and then B is third best, and then C, it goes down like that. So D would be the worst tier on this list. So Southwest is our first airline we're going to rank here. And Southwest, I think, is probably the most tricky and probably most divisive airline. I know tons of people that love Southwest and would immediately put it in S tier or A tier and are huge fans of Southwest. But really, the stats don't bore that out. I think it kind of is an average airline, if not slightly below average airline at Austin. It's really hard to avoid because they fly so many flights out of Austin, so you really can't ignore them. But they do have an A rating by 0 point or 0.02%. Their flight score just gets them an A, but really kind of average for a flight score on this data set. So I think we're just going to stick them in B. I think the tons of people who fly Southwest, I think it's a perfectly normal airline. I think they do some unique things that gets people attracted to Southwest. I think one of the biggest things is the free checked bags. Lots of people love the free checked bags. I never check a bag. I would recommend that no one ever checks a bag on any flight, regardless of the length, regardless of how long you're going. Uh, I just, I just don't like it because they'll usually lose it, and you may never see your bag again. Even with an AirTag, it's not going to help you. So, I would highly recommend not even taking advantage of that on Southwest. But if you do check bags all the time, I could see that being a benefit. But I would just consider pricing that in to whatever whenever you're searching. Another weird thing about Southwest is that they are not on any of the flight aggregators like Google Flights or Expedia or anything like that, just due to their systems and processes. I guess I don't fully understand why Southwest is not on any of those. And it's really the only carrier in the US that I think is not on those. There are some globally that are not, but Southwest is the most prominent one. So it's just, you kind of have to go out of your way to fly the airline. You have to, yeah, it's not great. Um, so I think B is fair, I think, for Southwest. And definitely, yeah, we know the dangers of getting your bag checked. And the line to Southwest can always go out the door. So I would just always advise not checking a bag, especially if you're flying early. Um, I had an issue with Southwest back in December where I got stuck in Syracuse, New York, and it was not great. So, and couldn't really get home. So, Southwest, maybe if they improve their systems a bit, I think they used to be an S tier airline. I think a lot of these airlines used to be S tier airlines, especially relative to now, and a lot of them have fallen down, I think, and they just need maybe just an overhaul, or maybe it's just the whole industry as a whole needs to get better. So, next airline, American Airlines. And if we look at the stats here, I mean, American flies tons of flights as well. They're the second biggest airline here at Austin. That's definitely gone up. I think in recent years, American Airlines has flown a lot more flights out of Austin. And really, they're also very similar to Southwest. They're right next to them in the rankings. They fly lots of flights, slightly more cancellations, but better on time performance. So, really, it's hard to argue that American Airlines is not also in B tier right next to Southwest. They fly to lots of destinations. They have a lot of unique destinations in American Airlines that I feel like Southwest doesn't really offer. Like American Airlines flies to Aspen, Colorado, which is kind of interesting. They also fly I think both Southwest and American fly to Cabo San Lucas. So there's some, use, and there's also, I think, Nassau, Bahamas, I think American Airlines flies to. So there's a lot of cool flights for you to take with American that are direct from Austin. Whereas Southwest, I think, is a little bit more utilitarian. I think their flight network's a little bit more focused on maybe like family or business travel, which is the vast majority of travel. So I totally understand that. But if you're more of like someone like me who likes to take cool flights and wants to get out and explore the world and do cool direct flights, maybe that's how I should phrase it. So American, I think, is a little bit better in that way, but really they're kind of similar. I think American and Southwest pretty average, honestly. So our next airline is Delta, and I think Delta is a fascinating airline as well because it has a really great reputation. People, especially if you've ever been to the Delta subreddit or any of these other things, people swear by Delta similar to how they swear by Southwest, but maybe even more so. And Delta really kind of doubles down on this. They really focus on this as part of their branding. So definitely Delta really likes to focus on their on-time performance, and it's definitely borne out in the stats over the years that Delta is one of the best in terms of like the mainline carriers in the U.S. And definitely that's supported by the data here. They definitely have one of the best on-time performance, certainly of all the mainline carriers. They have a somewhat high cancellation rate, which is kind of interesting, 1.2%, which is basically fourth or fifth on this list, and then they have almost a 91.5 flight score, which is pretty good. I think they also fly. They only fly to 14 destinations, but I really like their hubs. I really enjoyed Detroit. Detroit's like probably the best airport in the U.S. Apparently, Salt Lake City. My parents just went there. Have a really nice Delta terminal there. Fantastic. I know Atlanta gets a ton of hate, but honestly, I kind of like Atlanta as an airport. It's useful. You can get in and out. There's tons of flights, and it's utilitarian. It's not great, but I think it's better than a lot of hubs. So I think with that, Delta is going to end up in the A tier. Delta and American also do have lounges. As in my other video, I did talk about that. They both have lounges, and the American lounge, the Admirals Club, is not the greatest, but I don't think it's necessarily too bad. I would clearly put the Delta Sky Club as the nicest lounge at the Austin airport, and you do need to fly Delta in order to get in there, so that is a perk, and you can watch that video how you can actually get in there, but I do think A is fair for Delta. So the next, of the big four mainline carriers in the U.S., really people usually include just Delta, American, United, but Southwest flies just so much out of Austin that we have to really include them in there. But the next one is United. And United, the stats this year have not been nice to United. I mean, 70% on time, really 69% on time, the highest cancellation rate, almost 5%, and a flight score of 85. And I think that is somewhat surprising that their flight score is actually that high. Their flight score, I think, is somewhat surprisingly high, considering how many flights were canceled. I think they were canceling well over 50% of their flights for about a week in the middle of the summer, in the middle of this data. So it's definitely the worst of the mainline carriers in this data set. And to be objective, we kind of have to rate it on that based on this data. I'm not really including anything else. And really, the summer months are probably some of the most important travel months of the year. And if you mess something up now, then we need to dock you for it. And so American Airlines, I think, they do offer a lot of destinations, 35 destinations. It's more than Delta, and it's between Delta and American. So I think it's like 35 destinations. It's not bad. They fly to a lot of East Coast. They fly Denver. I think they fly LA, SFO. And of course Houston. So lots of useful kind of connections, especially if you're going towards Asia. SFO is a big hub for that, or Australia. So I think the fair thing to do, I'm going to put them in C for right now. I'm curious, maybe I'll move them down to D, but I think it's hard to put them in that bottom tier because they had a really rough summer. I think if that summer wasn't there, they'd probably be in B tier with American and Southwest, and it'd be pretty hard to distinguish them in terms of the data. But usually, I think this is kind of the pecking order that most people put Delta, American, and United in anyway. So the next busiest airline is Alaskan Airlines, and they flew 1,600 flights, which is a lot more than I thought. I mean, I've only flown Alaskan once out of Austin. It was I guess it was twice. It was once to Portland, and then I flew back through Seattle. And it's a pretty good flight. Honestly, I think a lot of people, Alaska, a lot of people swear by Alaskan Airlines. It's very popular, especially on the West Coast, especially the Pacific Northwest. A lot of people are very happy with Alaska. Alaska and JetBlue, I think, are very similar in a lot of ways. Similar sort of business model, similar. They are low cost carrier, I think similar tier as Southwest, but they're also kind of a full service carrier at the same time. So they kind of blur that line between a mainline carrier and like a low cost carrier in Southwest. But the stats in terms of where were we? Alaskan Airlines, right? Alaska Airlines is way up here. They have a really good flight score, 92.7. And the number of flights that they had, and the percentage on time, I thought the 7 destinations, mostly on the West Coast. I think they're flying Reno, San Jose, Seattle, Portland, and then a bunch more. I think LA as well. I'm not exactly sure what the other two are, but um, they did fly to a bunch of locations, which is nice, especially if you're going to the West Coast, which is more useful to me. I usually go west. I don't. I really go to the East Coast, but um, so to me, I think it's clear. I mean, they clearly have pretty decent on-time performance, similar to Delta. Way less cancellations though, and just a higher overall flight score. So this is, to me, this is an S tier airline. So I think we got to put South Alaska in the S tier. The next one, I feel like this is probably the most hated airline in America. It's Spirit, and Spirit, it's an ultra low cost carrier, and we'll have another one later. But really, a lot of people do not like these airlines, and I think a lot of people, I think, justifiably hate them. They either had a bad experience or they just heard someone who had a bad experience and they completely avoid them since. Um, so really, but I looked at the data, and Spirit to me is right up there with American and United, and kind of in the middle tier of airlines. They do have pretty high cancellations. 2% is quite high. And then a 66% on time, and then an overall flight score of 86. So it clearly puts them near United. And the other sort of concerning thing is they didn't really have this big problem that United had this summer. So maybe these numbers are more concerning than they actually are. That there's more problems with Spirit than maybe they're actually this data is actually showing. But I think one of the biggest problems with Spirit is that on-time performance, they leave such little time on the ground between flights, and Southwest is guilty of this too, and you can see why Southwest has such poor on-time performance. They leave such little time between a landing and a takeoff in the next flight that it's basically, well, here it's basically 50-50, 60-40 if you're going to actually take off on time. And I think that's just not a great philosophy, especially if you basically have to take the morning flights in order for your flight to be on time. I think this is like a poor thing for customers to have to deal with, because you don't know that when you're buying your ticket. You don't know how long the the plane's going to be on the ground, that if they can get the bags on, if they can even clean the plane, or really get the plane ready for the next flight. So to me, I think there's a lot of reasons people don't like Spirit. I think the ultra low cost carrier business model, I think, really rubs people the wrong way in terms of like fees for just about literally everything, in terms of carry on bags and everything. So to me, Spirit it's bad, but I think I have to put it next to United and put that in the C tier. They don't have a ton of problems where I think it really warrants a D rating in this tier list. The next airline is also a low-cost airline. It is Allegiant. And Allegiant, I think, is fairly unknown by a lot of people. Allegiant is similar to Spirit, but Allegiant actually has a base here in Austin. So I think that is, a few of these airlines have crews based out of Austin. I'm not exactly sure if Spirit does or not, but they have a crew based out of Austin. So that can help some of their stats, and maybe explain why in a second. We'll look at the stats of why that's so good. But Allegiant is primarily, I guess it's like headquarters are in Las Vegas, so it's definitely more geared towards casual like family travel and people trying to go to sunny destinations like Orlando or like San Diego or Phoenix. I think they have a lot of flights to Phoenix. So Allegiant is more focused on that, and it's similar to Spirit in that it's a low-cost airline. You'll have lots of fees and that kind of stuff, and that annoys people. But Allegiant has really good stats, and part of it is probably because they fly out of the South Terminal. So if you didn't know, there's actually 2 terminals at the Austin airport. Maybe I'll just try to pull it up and pull up the map Google Maps here, South Terminal. Because a lot of people don't even know this exists, and it's pretty neat. So let's pull this up. Make sure you can see that. Yeah, so the main terminal most people fly out of is the Barbara Jordan terminal up here. And then there's actually a South terminal down here. And Allegiant and Frontier fly out of the South terminal. So there's no current way to get between these two terminals, like within the two terminals. So you actually have to leave security and take a shuttle all the way around. Or you can, of course, park down here, and that's what I do. Or you can just Uber here. But a lot of people end up parking here for some reason and then taking the shuttle, and they're like, this is in the middle of nowhere. Actually, you can just drive there and park there yourself or Uber there, however. But I do quite enjoy the South Terminal for a lot of reasons. One, the line is never that long. There's only two airlines. There might at any given moment be one or two flights departing at a similar time. So you really just don't have huge lines. There's actually an outdoor area where you can have a beer or tacos or coffee at a food truck and just hang out. The sad news is the South Terminal is going away. So I'd be curious what will happen to Allegiant's numbers, or if they'll just pull out of Austin entirely. That is definitely possible. They have not promised that they'll stick around because they do have, I assume, a pretty good deal at the South Terminal. So Allegiant, 80% on time, canceled only 30 or 0.3% of the time. A 92% flight score is very good. And I have a hard time not putting them near the top of this list. They have a lot of useful destinations for people. So they only flew 600 flights, but to 21 destinations. So lots of really interesting destinations. I know they fly, of course, to Las Vegas and Orlando, but they do fly to, I think, Bozeman, Montana. So if you want to go to a direct flight to Yellowstone, Allegiant is probably one of the best options. So Allegiant, I love Allegiant. I think I've flown them quite a few times. I think they do have weird flight schedules you have to work around. Like usually they fly out like Thursday and return like Sunday or something like that. But I like Allegiant a lot. I'm gonna put them in the A tier and hope that they stick around. I'll be curious what happens to their stats after they get kicked from the South Terminal, as the South Terminal is going to be closing here in the foreseeable future. I'm not sure when it will happen. They have not said anything yet, but the South Terminal will be closing because the city bought out the lease essentially after a lengthy court settlement. But yeah, so they bought out the lease, so then they can extend. They're gonna build a second terminal, essentially here in the middle, and then they, I guess, needed this South Terminal to be closed in order for them to do that. So, the next airline. Another one of these airlines similar to the Alaskan, where I think a lot of people have a lot of, loyalty to JetBlue. A lot of people really enjoy JetBlue. They fly primarily to the East Coast, so they'll fly. I think there's a flight to Boston. I flew that flight from Boston. It was pretty good. They fly, I think, an A220 on that route, which is a pretty brand new airplane, really nice. My favorite part about that plane is that it does that seat configuration where it's 3 seats and 2 seats. I think it's really the only plane left in the U.S. that, well, I guess there might be like an E175 or something like that, but I do enjoy the A220 because you can get those 2 seats if you're just flying you and your partner, or just you and your travel buddy, and it's just great, and you're not going to have to worry about sharing a row with some random dude. So I do enjoy that about JetBlue. They have pretty nice new airplanes, but their stats are just not that great. I mean, their flight score is the second worst, 83%. They only have 5 destinations, primarily on the East Coast, and their on-time performance is pretty terrible. I mean, 57% on time. So to me, that tells me that maybe flying more of those like late in the day kind of flights that are more likely to be affected by weather. JetBlue primarily flies out of the East Coast, so there have been crazy delays on the East Coast this year due to air traffic control and weather and all sorts of stuff. So that's probably unfairly hurting JetBlue just based on the areas that they fly. but I think I have to dock them. I have to dock them some points here. I think for the reputation that they have, I think they really underperformed here in Austin. 1.3% cancellation rate is pretty high. So I'm gonna put JetBlue in D tier. I think they just did not really perform that well. I think the destinations and stuff like that just did not really perform. And maybe I'll come back to this, but I think putting JetBlue in D tier I think is appropriate. I think they certainly could rise in these rankings if we redo them in December or something, because hopefully the East Coast has less delays and stuff. But to me, they just really didn't do that good of a job. The next airline is Air Canada. We're going to get to the three. These three airlines are the like foreign flag carriers that fly basically 1 or 2 flights per day out of Austin. So Air Canada flies to Toronto and Vancouver, and Aeromexico flies to Mexico City, and British Airways flies to London Heathrow. And the stats on these three airlines could not be further apart. Air Canada, similar problem with JetBlue in that there have been a lot of issues at Toronto. I'm not exactly sure about Vancouver, but certainly the East Coast has had some problems, and that's affected Air Canada. And this flight I used to fly this flight quite a bit. I have family in Toronto, and yeah, that flight was frequently extremely late or canceled basically all the time. So this flight honestly just drove me crazy. I don't know why they would even, at one point they were doing 2 flights a day and they would just cancel one very frequently. So 50% on time, 2% cancellation. It's pretty terrible. It's right there with JetBlue. I have to put Air Canada in D tier. And part of this is just personal frustration with Air Canada. And I think the other problem with Air Canada is like, yeah, they fly to Toronto or Vancouver, but there are other ways to get to those cities if you're trying to visit those cities, and I would honestly recommend you take them. There's, in the case of Toronto, you could go to like Buffalo, New York, which is probably a cheaper flight anyway, and you're probably going to get there on time, and you could just take a train or a bus or rent a car and drive to Toronto. In the case of Vancouver, you could just fly to Seattle. It's really not that far, or you could even fly to like, there's a city by the border there, like Blaine or Bellingham. I think you can fly there. Air Canada is just, yeah, they do put interesting planes on these routes. I think they were putting 737s at one point, but they usually fly the Embraer 175, which is just a dreadful plane to be on for, yeah, it's like a 4.5-4 hour flight to Toronto. It is have that 3 and 2 configuration, but you can't even fit regular size carry-ons on that plane. Air Canada is just, it needs to be better. It definitely needs to be better. Probably one of the worst airlines in all of North America. It's definitely gone downhill. And used to be a very respectable airline. And maybe their long haul product from Toronto or Vancouver would be pretty nice, or maybe it's pretty affordable. So maybe you could justify it that way, but not for me. Not if you're just trying to get to Canada. The next airline could not be more different. It's Aeromexico. They fly to Mexico City. They have an A rating. They have an 85% on-time rating, which is the best of all of our airlines. None of their flights were canceled. I mean, that's just crazy. 152 flights, no cancellations. That's crazy. 95% flight score. That is two and a half points better than the second place Alaska Air. I mean, Aeromexico, I gave them a shout out in my last video about like great flights to take, or I think it was 2 episodes ago. Aeromexico is fantastic. They're S tier. I mean, their stats are great. You're flying to a really cool destination. I can't speak to their planes. I'm not exactly sure what they fly on that route or if they're particularly nice, but honestly, I think it's worth it. The last airline on our tier list to do here is British Airways. British Airways is at the bottom of our list in terms of flight score. And its cancellation rate is quite high, 2.5% roughly, and then 46% on time. And, if it's even if it's a 1 hour delay on a flight to London, you're probably going to make up the vast majority of that delay on the flight. Just due to the nature of how they schedule things, a delay on a long haul flight to London is usually not that big of a deal unless you're trying to maybe catch a flight to India or Dubai or something like that, or another city in Europe, which can always be very stressful. So I'm trying to make excuses, but 46% on time is pretty dreadful, especially bottoms out our list here and causes them to drop in the flight score rating. And their cancellation rate is also one of the worst. It's second worst on our list. So British Airways, I think their product is pretty nice. I think it's a 777, or maybe no, I think it's an A350 now. So it's a brand new plane. I flew on the 777 to London, and it was pretty nice. I mean, I don't know. I think the long haul product's pretty decent by British Airways. It's not, anything to write home about. It's not really anything better than American or United or Delta. Maybe Delta slightly better than all those, but it's pretty normal. But it's okay. And then you do get access to the lounge, the American Airlines lounge, but it's just the stats do not bear this out. If you're trying to get a direct flight to London, then you want it to be on time. That's one of the biggest reasons you would take the direct flight. So British Airways is in D tier. They do not do very well. I'd be curious where Virgin Atlantic is on this ranking. Let's actually look it up. Let me pull it up. Virgin Atlantic also flies to London, and I think they only fly like 3 days a week, which is why they are not on this list, because they did not fly enough flights. Let's pull up the dashboard real quick. Yeah, Virgin Atlantic, very similar, actually, extremely similar there. Where's British Airways? Yeah, all the way down here. Pretty dreadful, actually, but pretty similar, actually. So Virgin Atlantic, not too much better than British Airways when flying to London. I don't know. I think they fly to Gatwick, or maybe they fly to Heathrow. I'm not sure. But yeah, this is the tier list that I came up with. I think this is a pretty fair and objective tier list. We got Alaska Airlines, Aeromexico in S tier, and then Delta and Allegiant in A tier, and then Southwest American in B tier, United and Spirit in C tier. D tier is JetBlue, Air Canada, and British Airways. I think that's pretty fair. I think that's pretty objective. Hopefully I gave enough reasons for why I put these airlines where I did. The other thing I do want to shout out before we go is my flight stats dashboard. You can of course access this if you join my Patreon. If you become a patron, you can see flight stats for all sorts of different flights. So yeah, let's look at Albuquerque here. I wanted to look at ABQ. Sorry, Albuquerque. There we go. That's a hard one to spell. So maybe I want to look at flights to Albuquerque. What is the best flight? What are the best options? You can see here, you've got Southwest and you got American flying there, direct flights, and you can see all the different stats. So you can see, hey, what is the average delay for these flights? Maybe let's sort this by time of day. So you can see here, these early morning flights are all rated A because they all leave usually on time. Yep, good on-time performance of those flights. But these American Airlines flights later in the day, they're more of a crapshoot, right? Only 50% on time. So that's what's great about the flight stats dashboard. If you purchase it, you get access through my Patreon. It's only $5 a month, but you can really become a more informed consumer. I use it all the time when I'm looking at flights. It's just very useful. I think this kind of data is always kind of hidden from consumers, and I think it just really helps everyone become more informed about all their flight options. You can, of course, even look by departures or arrivals, so you can look at arriving flights or departing flights. Maybe let's look at those London flights. Yeah, I guess London is the... so we got British Airways, We have different departure times here, slightly different, but British Airways, we can look here based on the airlines, so you can compare the two, see which one's better. Maybe they're a similar price. They have similar departure times, so really maybe go with the one that has better performance, which is clearly this Virgin Atlantic flight. So pretty useful. I appreciate y'all's support on there. This is the flight stats dashboard. So with that, that's gonna be it for the stream. Thanks for joining. This is the Austin boarding pass. Catch you later.